Hello, my fellow bookworms, and welcome back to another video. My name is Isa, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I've read so far in 2025, from the very worst to some new favorites. I'm already a little bit late for this challenge. I can't believe that we're already almost through the summer. It's gone by super fast for me, but honestly, it's been heat wave after heat wave here in Switzerland, so I'm very much looking forward to the autumn and being able to put back on my chunky sweaters and to read my creepy books, although on the latter part I've already started. So before we get started with the questions, I thought it would be interesting to look at my reading as a whole so far this year. And to do so, I will be using Storygraph. If you don't know, Storygraph is essentially like Goodreads, but it allows for some more precise rating. So instead of having to round up or round down your rating for a book, you can, for example, put 3.25 stars. I'm using it for the first time this year, and I really like it so far. And one thing that I find very cool is that it allows you to see more in-depth statistics. So rather than just the average number of books that you've read, you can also see the sort of moods that you're reading more, the genres, your favorite authors, and it also creates some pie charts and other graphs, which as a researcher myself, I really appreciate. And since this is my first time using it, I actually haven't looked at any of the statistics beforehand, so I will have my live reaction for the first time with you all. So without further ado, let's see how that looks. So the first is just how many books I've read so far this year. I've read 25 as of now in August, which is honestly pretty low for me, but honestly it's to be expected. I'm in my first year of my PhD. I'm learning French. I'm at intermediate right now, but I really need it for work. And then on top of that, I'm getting married later this year, so we're also doing wedding planning. So suffice to say, free time has not been abundant this year. According to Storygraph, I've also read 100% fiction this year, which actually surprises me a bit. I used to read a lot of nonfiction, both kind of in my area in neuroscience and also topics I found interesting, or memoirs. I especially like to listen to memoirs on audiobook style since they are often read by the narrator, so you feel like someone is just telling you their story directly. I think the reason for this is that I've realized with a lot of nonfiction, there are a few central ideas, and throughout the book, they're kind of repeated over and over, whereas they could actually just be summarized even in a few pages sometimes. For example, this month I started reading a book called Pests, which is about how the concept of certain animals as being pests is very often a pretty arbitrary social classification and is sometimes linked to disgust, which isn't always so accurate with how clean the animals actually are or how likely they are to spread disease. So it's a really interesting topic and concept, but I made it to about a third of the way through the book and I felt like I hadn't learned anything new, and the same premise of the idea was just repeating itself. Of course, it depends on a bit your background and what you've read before, but in my experience, maybe I've just been a bit unlucky. That's been the case with a lot of nonfiction lately. I often get curious about sort of random topics sometimes, and now I prefer just to research it a bit myself and scratch that itch and then move on. I mean, when I have to read anyway a lot of very dry papers during the day for work, then at the end of the day, I would much rather relax and sit down with fantasy rather than having more nonfiction, whereas life is already a little bit too full of nonfiction, I feel. Okay, that's a bit of a tangent and a half. Let's check out the moods that I've been reading this year, which seems really interesting to me. It looks like I have 4 slices of the pie chart that are about the same size, and those are dark, mysterious, adventurous, and tense. And that sounds about right, the kind of books that I like to read. And for the least read moods, it also looks very accurate, but it's pretty funny to see because you have the tiniest slivers of the pie chart for lighthearted and hopeful. Yeah, usually not my kind of read. I prefer a lot of tension in my books. Every now and again, I will go for something lighter, especially if I'm on holiday somewhere and I don't want a very tense book that I think could also be a favorite to be interrupted a lot if I'm sitting at the beach, for example. And in that case, I choose something more lighthearted just because it's easier to dip in and out of the story that way. I think I really like the concept, for example, of cozy fantasy. It sounds so nice, but then when I'm actually reading it, I'm usually not so invested. I think if a story is more character driven, I really have to love those characters. House on the Cerulean Sea, I think that's the biggest cozy fantasy that worked for me versus something like Legends and Lattes. I felt so good when I started reading it, but then at a certain point I wanted more tension in the story. For the pacing as well as the length of the story, it seems like in both cases I'm reading medium pacing, medium length book with about a third of the books being outside of the range. And then genre wise, no surprise, fantasy is the biggest. I am really surprised actually to see that literary fiction comes in the second place, and romance is in fourth place above horror, which off of the top of my head, I can't really remember more than a couple literary fiction, or I feel like I've only read like one romance. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, after checking, it actually seems like it's because Storygraph is categorizing the same book in multiple genres. So a few thrillers as well as fantasies kind of got lumped in the literary category. And if I look at romance, it seems like I thought there's only one true romance book by Emily Henry, and the rest were fantasies with romance subplots, which yeah, still interesting to see, even if the categories don't feel 100% accurate to me. I mean, of course, you can have books that are in multiple categories, but I wouldn't say that literary fiction is the second highest genre that I read. It feels a little bit misleading to say that. And for the least read genres, it is a tie between middle grade, classics, and YA. This really varies a lot by year, but really interesting to see. Okay, and for the most read authors, it looks like it's also a tie between Grady Hendrix, Brandon Sanderson, and Andy Weir. I read 3 books of each of them this year, and I think it was I think for each of them, it was also my first time reading their work this year. So obviously, I found some new authors that I really enjoyed their stuff, and I am really looking forward to reading more of them. Especially, I'm not sure that Andrew Weir has much more that I'm interested in right now. I would be interested in following what else he comes up with. Grady Hendrix, definitely, I'm going to read more from him, especially in the autumn. And Brendan Sanderson, I look forward to reading Stormlight Archives and some more works from him. So, yeah, it's been a pretty nice year for discovering new authors. And my average rating of books this year, which this was taken more so from Goodreads, is 3.84, which I think is higher than usual for me. I think it's usually more like 3.4 ish. I think this is due to a combination of things. I've been a lot better this year at just putting down books that aren't working for me and being more honest with the type of books that I enjoy rather than pushing through. So there you have it, a pretty unusual reading year for me, I would say, but also very successful with plenty of gems, both in terms of books and authors, and I'm very happy to see how high my rating is. Hopefully I can keep that up for the rest of the year. Now let's get into some questions from the tag, starting with the best sequel that I've read this year. And I think I will have to give that to Two Twisted Crowns from the Shepherd King duology, the sequel of One Dark Window. Honestly, these two books blend a lot together in my head, but I think that that's a good sign because it means that the pacing was really maintained throughout the duology. I find that that's often the case with a duology. I feel like there are a lot of trilogies that exist that really should have been duologies, and so it's nice when a book kind of knows when to stop. I think what I liked the most about these books was definitely the ambience. Everything was very woodsy. There are mists coming from the woods that are spreading, and you could get this sickness that gives you a certain magic, but magic isn't allowed in this realm. And if the authorities hear that you get this sickness, then you'll be executed. The magic system is cards based, and it was very visual. They kind of look a little bit like tarot cards in my head, and you can use their magic by touching them. But if you use them for too long, each card, depending on the type of card that it is, it also has negative side effects. That conceptually enough was very cool for me, but basically the whole world feels very woodsy. Even the family names are all based on different trees, and at their family estates, they will have that specific tree. And each time I discovered a new family name, I looked up the tree, and they were so beautiful, and they've kind of stuck with me in that way. Each family has a literal family tree, as in a type of tree that's also planted in front of their estate, which represents their family. They'll wear the colors of that tree. For example, the spindle tree is bright red, so you wear these bright red colors that go along with it. It was really cool also learning about these trees. I learned about the yew tree, for example, just because I wanted to be able to visualize things properly. And I learned that they're often buried in churches or in cemeteries in Europe, and that they have a lot of real life lore behind them. Very cool in general. I love anything that feels foresty in a story, and that definitely didn't disappoint. The only thing I will say is that there was a central mystery that you don't know until later on in the second book. And for me, and I think maybe the average reader, it was very obvious what the answer was to this, even from the beginning of the first book. So that's a little bit disappointing, because I love being breadcrumbed lore and putting things together. I love it when I'm wrong, and that the answer is even more cool than I was imagining. But despite that, it was still a really nice read. The next question is books that have been released this year that I'm excited to get to. Honestly, I'm always more excited, I think, for the autumn releases. They're always the best, I think, depending on the genre you read, but usually for fantasy, the autumn releases are top tier. But while there's none that I'm dying to get to as soon as possible, I think I will definitely read at some point Sunrise on the Reaping. I had not long ago, before the new couple of books were published, rewatched all of the Hunger Games, and I kind of want it to be a little bit less fresh in my mind before I go back and reread everything, as well as the two new releases for these books. But for sure, I will eventually get to that. Otherwise, the only other book that's on my radar that was released this year is Bury Your Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I really liked Adi LaRue, but I did hear mixed opinions about this new book. I think it also depends a lot on the person. If you have read that book, let me know if you think that it's worth it, or let me know also if there's other books that have been released this year that you think I should definitely get to. For the most anticipated releases for the second half of the year, yes, I have many. I think the number one that I'm the most excited for is Strength of the Few, which is the sequel to The Will of the Many, which I loved. I thought the twist at the ending was so cool, and I have all the faith that Islington is going to make it a really strong second book. If you haven't read yet Will of the Many, you definitely should. It's such an interesting and unique hard magic system. The political intrigue is really intrinsically tied up with the magic system in such a cool way. I love a hard magic system. I love lore. There's also this ancient society that they have runes and other things from that no one really understands how they were living. And you start to get little pieces of the puzzle together. And yeah, just such an amazing read. I think Strength of the Few, that has to be my number one. But I'm also really excited and want to read as soon as it's out Catabasis. I love R.F. Kuang. I loved Babel and the Poppy War trilogy. And honestly, I love anything dark academia. I think it's so cool that she made one based on Dante's Inferno. I heard some people that were able to be beta readers didn't super love it. They felt like that she was maybe not trusting her audience so much and kind of giving them too much information. But I mean, that's also the point of beta readers, so that they can read and give feedback. And I'm sure, or I hope, that she's also incorporated that. Regardless, I will for sure read it. And there are more that I'm looking forward to. I would say the third biggest that I will definitely read as soon as it comes out is the third Empire the Vampire book. Now, I have complicated feelings about Jay Kristoff. I think the lore was very cool in this. I loved the kind of twists that he used on religions, specifically Catholicism, that he used in the book. And also in general, I love a good grimdark. It makes everything feel so much more real to me. But I did notice reading the earlier two books that there's a certain pattern of very self-inserty, overly sexualized content. Um, a lot of like creaking leather, and the way that he talks about his wife, who's supposed to be his great love. It's just very weird. Like I mean, I'm not bothered usually by sexual content in book, but it was just very weird to say the least. And I think once you notice this pattern, it's a sort of thing that I think would bother most people, or at least find it funny. I joke around a lot with Pablo about this, but it's not like it feels problematic. I just have almost secondhand embarrassment reading this, and it takes me out of the story. That said, the lore was cool enough that I definitely will continue the series. I really hope that the third one will come back stronger, because the first one for me was incredible. The second one I didn't like so much, and it was very slow paced. The third one hopefully is going to be great. The next question is favorite new author, and I think I have to give this to Grady Hendrix, because at this point I'm pretty sure I will read all of his work. He writes horror in a very fun and sort of nostalgic way. He pays homage to a lot of very classic horror, like from the 70s and 80s, kind of in a similar way that Stranger Things did. And I think that kind of ambiance also made the books feel kind of cozy to me, and I surprisingly liked a lot of the characters, which typically doesn't really happen to me with horror. I'm more so usually reading it for the suspense, so it was very cool to get this kind of cozy feeling. They're perfect if you want this kind of creepy ambience but without going too dark. I do like when it goes quite dark, like Slewfoot, for example, but I just haven't read anything quite like his work before. Let me know if you know any other similar authors, and I would definitely check them out. The next question is favorite new character from a book, and I think I have to give that to Sazed, or maybe Tensoon. They're both from Mistborn, and I wish that I had seen so much more of them. I really love these characters. My favorite ship in a book from this year definitely has to be from the Martian, the protagonist, and his companion that he meets. Just kidding, kind of. It definitely doesn't go there, but it would have been funny. Honestly, I don't usually have people that I ship in a book. I think if I had to choose one, it would be from The Six Deaths of a Saint, which is a short story actually, and there's not really a romance in it. I can't really say much because it's a short story, so you really don't want to know anything going in. But it was excellent, and it made me cry, and I felt like I really felt the connection that there was there, which I can't really say from many other books, honestly. I think I do know what my favorite ship will be in the second half of the year, but we'll see with that. I might have a stronger answer for the next part of the year. An underrated gem that I read this year, there have been several, but I think I would like to give it to Galatea by Madeline Miller, just because her other work is so popular and so well loved. I also really loved her work, especially Circe has been my favorite so far, but Galatea is a novella, and it's also really good, also made me cry. But Galatea was really excellent, and it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you've liked her other work. For rereads, I finally have a physical book to show you. It's Pablo's copy, but that's okay. If We Were Villains. I reread it this year on audio for the first time, and it was a really nice way to enjoy the story. I think if I would have listened to it the first time on audio, I would have been really confused with how big the cast is. But yeah, I love Dark Academia, and I think this has to be my all-time favorite Dark Academia. Such a good book. Books that made me cry. I mean, there have been several, and I've already spoiled it a little bit, but definitely Galatea. Definitely The Six Deaths of a Saint. I think that one I cried the most for. And also at the very ending, sort of the afterword of Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. I don't think it's meant to make you cry, but it did make me cry in a positive way. I also recently finished Night Swim. That also made me cry. There's a common theme in all of those books that made me cry. So if you've read them, you could maybe pick up on it. Books that made me happy this year. Well, as we already saw from Storygraph, I'm not reading very many happy, lighthearted books, but there still have been some. I would say Howl's Moving Castle, definitely. It was my first time reading it, but I love, love, love that film. Also, Paladin's Grace was very cozy and made me happy. I ended up feeling disappointed with it later, but I think if I had gone in not expecting more of a story and to solve the mystery in a satisfying way, I would have liked it even more. As it was, I was already like smiling and feeling very cozy with how much I like the characters and some of the quirks of the characters. This paladin loves to knit socks for people, and there's like a little raccoon cat pet. It's very feel good. The most beautiful book that I bought this year. This is a very easy competition because I think I've only bought 2 books this year. I need to treat myself more often with physical copies. But in my defense, I am saving up for a wedding. Anyway, I treated myself very recently to a physical hardcover of Priory of the Orange Tree. It's huge. Watching booktube videos, I never really realize how hard it is sometimes to hold the books, especially larger fantasy copies. But yeah, it's gorgeous. I love this cover. A very cool aspect of it too is that you have on the front cover these Western wyverns, and then on the back you have more Eastern dragons. I also really appreciate that the spine still has some details, like it has this wyvern tail and a part of the wing. I really appreciate when the art kind of continues over rather than everything just being plain in one color. Beautiful book. I think it's not even my most beautiful from this year. It's probably my most beautiful copy of all time. Books that I want to get to before the end of the year. Of course, like many of you, I probably have a list that is really not realistic and way too long. But I will definitely start this year because my loan is also ready from the library. The Infernal Devices series, which I have ready from the library now, at least the first one, Clockwork Angel. I also definitely want to read the Hacienda, which is a gothic horror that takes place at a haunted hacienda in Mexico. I love gothic horror, and I'm getting married in an hacienda this year, so I think it would be really fun to read it beforehand. I also definitely want to read Blood Over a Bright Haven this year. I know that I'm going to love it, and maybe I'll also get to Sword of Kaijin, but we'll see. I think those are the books that I will definitely read before the end of the year. And then the list of the ones that I want to get to will just go on and on. I know one more. I will also definitely get to My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I've been wanting to read it for a long time, but I wanted to save it to read during the autumn. So those are my definites as well as the new releases. My biggest surprise this year, I think, has to be The Martian. I was expecting it to be good based on what people were telling me, but I wasn't expecting it to be laugh out loud funny. Like, I was actually chuckling out loud all the time reading this book, maybe more than any other book that I've read this year. It was so good and so tense and fast paced the whole time. I feel like this would also be a really good book to get someone out of a reading slump. My biggest disappointment, on the other hand, I think has to be When Among Crows. And it's not because I necessarily had very high expectations when going into this book. It's not the most talked about book that there is, but it's more so because the first few chapters, or maybe even the first chapter, was excellent. So I was already telling Pablo from the beginning that it was going to be a favorite book. I loved it so much. I should have relaxed a little bit because after the beginning, it got really boring. It became very tropey. In the beginning, it kind of promised that it was going to have a lot of Polish folklore, which it did, but it didn't feel magical. I mean, it was also maybe because it was taking place in the real world modern day. But then again, a lot of other books are able to do this while still feeling magical. So I don't know exactly what it was, but it didn't work for me. And it's really too bad because I feel like if it maintained that same ambience from the beginning, I would have really loved it. And the best book so far from the first half of the year has to be The Bear and the Nightingale. This is a book that was sitting on my shelf for about a couple of years before I finally got to reading it. I was expecting it to have a very cozy, wintry ambience, and it definitely does, but it was really on another level. I've already talked about how I love kind of folkloric, woodsy settings, and this did it better than any other book that I've ever read by far. Everything is still so vivid in my mind. I have so much love for the protagonist, Vasia, and all of the creatures in her world, and especially one which is sort of like a house cleaning elf. There were such diverse magical creatures in this world, and it was really interwoven with the real world, although not everyone necessarily sees them or even believes in them. It's just sort of tradition to maybe leave out a bit of milk for this creature that's believed to take care of the horses, for example. And there's sort of a magical creature for everything that you can think of. There's especially one, which is my all-time favorite, that lives in the chimney, and it kind of does some of the cleaning up and tending to in the house. Aside from just being cozy, though, there's also a very real threat, which is a retelling of a very classic Slavic folk tale, which I watched an old Ukrainian, I believe, film of a long time ago, and being able to recognize it in this book when I had almost forgotten about that film was very cool. The only downside I would say is that when everything comes to a head at the end in this final battle, as there often is, in fantasy, no spoilers, um, things just don't really make sense. It really fell flat, was resolved way too quickly, and also just the physical mechanics of it was so bad that I was actually laughing out loud from it. But I mean, it was just a few pages, and the entire rest of the book was perfect. So definitely still worth checking out, especially in the winter. The worst book that I've read so far this year, I also have a physical copy of, and that is Cleopatra and Frankenstein. Now, to be fair, this is not a genre I've realized that I like even at the best of times. This is the kind of literary fiction where there's no plot. You're just following unlikable characters living their unlikable and complicated lives, and that's kind of it. I'd had this book on my shelf for a really long time. At a time in my life where I used to go into bookstores like 4 times a day because there were two on my commute to work, and I would pass them in both directions. And I used to just look at copies of books that people were talking a lot about and be excited over them, more so because of what other people were saying. And in this case, I finally got it and gave in to the hype, and it's just really not the kind of book for me. I mean, I like a kind of morally gray, complex character, but I straight up dislike these characters to the point where I really didn't care what happened to them. And especially at the point where I finally DNF'd it was with the Sugar Glider and Frank, and it just became too much for me. Like at that point, I hated them, I didn't care, and I felt kind of angry, and I gave it up. So yeah, lesson learned, not for me at all, and I think in the future I would have just DNF'd it a lot sooner. So there you have it. That's everything from me today. I would love to hear from all of you in the comments. It's been so much fun chatting with you all in the last couple of videos. I would love to hear what have been your best and worst reads of the year, if you've read any of the ones that I've mentioned, and if it's also been a little bit of weird reading year for you as well. If you enjoyed hanging out today, please hit the like button or consider subscribing. It's a really nice way to help me out and show support. I look forward to hearing more from you all and wish you all very great reads in the future. Bye-bye.